Ruth had done everything right. Everything. For 14 years, she woke up before her husband, made his tea, ironed his church clothes, sat in the front row every Sunday with a smile so perfect it looked painted on. 14 years of being the good pastor's wife. 14 years of silence. And nobody, not one single person in that church, ever thought to ask if she was okay. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to where it all started to fall apart. Ruth and Pastor Emmanuel got married young. She was full of dreams back then. She wanted to start a small business, maybe a catering company or a boutique. She had ideas, she had fire, she had plans. But when Emmanuel's ministry began to grow, she quietly folded her dreams and tucked them away. She told herself it was a sacrifice for God. She told herself Emmanuel would see it one day and appreciate it. She kept waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Emmanuel was not a bad man. Let's be clear about that. He paid the bills. He didn't beat her. He didn't chase other women, at least not that she knew of. But he was not present. Not really. He could sit at the dinner table and be 1,000 miles away in his head, thinking about his next sermon, his next conference, his next big ministry project. Ruth would talk, and he would nod, but she could tell he wasn't listening. She would touch his hand and he would gently pull it away. Not in a mean way, but in the way that hurts even more. Like she wasn't even there. At church, it was different. At church, Emmanuel was warm, funny, full of energy. He remembered people's birthdays. He prayed for sick members with tears in his eyes. And he hugged the elderly women and joked with the young men. People loved him. The congregation thought he was perfect. And beside him, always smiling, always dressed modestly, always quiet, was Ruth, his crown, his trophy, his assistant. She had stopped being his wife a long time ago. She just didn't know how to say it out loud. Then one afternoon, a car pulled up in front of their house, and a woman stepped out wearing bright yellow heels, a fitted dress, and the biggest smile Ruth had seen in years. It was Chisholm, her best friend from secondary school, the one who had moved to Canada 15 years ago and barely looked back. Ruth ran outside and they hugged for a long time, right there on the street. Chisholm came inside, sat at the kitchen table, and within the first hour, she already knew something was wrong. Chisholm had always been sharp like that. She looked at Ruth's plain clothes, her tired eyes, the way she flinched slightly every time a door opened, and Chisholm didn't say anything immediately. She just watched. That evening, Emmanuel came home, said a polite hello to Chisholm, told Ruth his dinner should be ready by 7, and went straight to his study. He didn't ask how Chisholm's flight was. He didn't sit down with them. He just disappeared behind that study door, like he always did. Chisholm looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at her plate. "How long has it been like this?" Chisholm asked quietly. Ruth tried to smile. "Like what?" "Everything is fine." Chisholm was not going to accept that. "Ruth, it's me. Talk to me." And that was it. That was all it took. Ruth opened her mouth to say something small, something safe, and instead she started to cry. Not the soft, polite kind of crying she did in the bathroom at night. The ugly kind, the kind that had been trapped inside for years. She cried and she talked and she cried some more. She told Chisholm everything. The loneliness, the silence, the way she felt invisible in her own home, the way she had buried her dreams and got nothing in return, the way she smiled every Sunday and felt like a fraud. Chisholm held her hand across the table and listened to every single word. When Ruth finally stopped, Chisholm was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have been so busy taking care of everyone else that you forgot about yourself. It's time to come back, Ruth. Come back to yourself." Those words hit Ruth somewhere deep. The next morning, Chisholm took her shopping. Ruth protested. She said the clothes were too fitted, too modern, not appropriate for a pastor's wife. Chisholm told her to stop using pastor's wife as a reason to disappear. Ruth bought 2 dresses and a pair of earrings. She felt strange wearing them, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like herself. She started working on her old business idea. She created a simple plan for a small catering business. She began taking online courses late at night. She started talking to people, networking, building something small but hers. There was light coming back into her eyes. Emmanuel didn't notice, not the new clothes, not her excitement at dinner when she talked about her business idea, not the way she was coming alive again. He just nodded, chewed his food and went back to his study. It was like watching someone try to water a stone. 3 weeks after Chisholm left, Ruth attended a professional business conference in the city. She almost didn't go, but she pushed herself. She wore one of the new dresses, did her makeup and walked in there with her name tag and a notebook. That's where she met Daniel. He was standing near the coffee table reading the event program, and he looked up when she walked past and smiled. Not a church smile, not a polite smile, a real, warm, genuine smile. They started talking, and before Ruth knew it, an hour had passed. Daniel was an architect. He was divorced, no children. He was easy to talk to. The kind of person who asked questions and actually waited to hear the answers. He asked about her business idea and he got excited for her. He gave her practical advice. He said, "You should go for it. You clearly know what you're doing." He said it like he meant it, or like he saw something real in her. Ruth drove home that evening feeling something she couldn't quite name. She told herself it was just a nice conversation with a professional contact. She even added him on LinkedIn. That was professional. That was normal. Nothing to worry about, but Daniel messaged her the next day, just to share an article about catering businesses. She replied. He replied, and it continued. Slowly, carefully. Like water rising without anyone noticing the flood coming. A few weeks later, they met for coffee to discuss business. Ruth told herself it was networking. Daniel brought a printed document with notes he had made specifically to help her business plan. He had spent time on it. Emmanuel had not spent that kind of time on her in years. They met again. And again. The meetings moved from coffee shops to quiet restaurants. The conversations moved from business to life. He told her about his failed marriage, how lonely he had been. She told him things she had never said to Emmanuel. And somewhere in those quiet evenings, something dangerous was growing between them. Ruth knew it. She knew exactly what it was, and she kept going anyway. Because for the first time in 14 years, she felt like a person, not a church accessory. Not a ministry helper, a person with feelings and worth and a story that mattered to someone. She told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. They had never even touched. But she knew. Deep down, she knew. Meanwhile, back at the church, a woman named Sister Paulina had noticed something. Sister Paulina was the deacon's wife, and she had sharp eyes and sharper ears. She had seen Ruth at a restaurant one evening, laughing with a man who was not her husband. She had seen it once and kept quiet. Then she saw it again. And this time, she took out her phone. Paulina did not go to Ruth. She did not go to Emmanuel. She gathered her evidence quietly and waited for the right moment. That moment came at the monthly church board meeting. It was a Wednesday evening. The board members were seated around the long table. Deacons, elders, women's leaders, and Pastor Emmanuel at the head. Ruth was there too, as always, seated quietly to the side. They were discussing the church's upcoming anniversary when Paulina stood up and said she had something urgent to bring before the board. The room went still. Paulina brought out her phone and passed it around the table. Photos of Ruth, at a restaurant smiling, all with Daniel. Their hands not quite touching but close. Too close. The room got very quiet. Emmanuel looked at the photos and his face changed. Something behind his eyes went dark and cold. He looked at Ruth. The whole room looked at Ruth. Ruth felt the floor disappear beneath her. She wanted to explain. She wanted to say it wasn't what it looked like, but even as the words formed in her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. And maybe she was tired of saying things that weren't true. "Is this you?" Emmanuel asked. His voice was low and tight. Ruth looked at him. She looked at the table full of church people who had watched her be the perfect pastor's wife for 14 years, and she said, "Yes." The room erupted. People were talking over each other. Someone called for prayer. An elder said it was a scandal. Paulina sat down with the satisfied look of someone who had done their duty. Emmanuel stood up and asked everyone to leave. When the room was empty, he turned to Ruth. "How long?" he asked. "It was not physical," she said, "but I won't pretend it was nothing." And then something happened that neither of them expected. Ruth started talking, really talking. She told him everything she had been holding for 14 years. She told him about the loneliness, about feeling invisible, about burying her dreams, about sitting in the front row every Sunday feeling like a decoration, about how Daniel was the first person in years to look at her like she was worth listening to, about how she didn't go looking for him. She went looking for herself and found him along the way. She was shaking, but she didn't stop talking. Emmanuel sat down slowly. Like something heavy had landed on him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Ruth never expected. "I failed you." Not, "How dare you?" Not, "Get out." Not, "What will people say?" He said, "I failed you." And his voice broke on the last word. That Sunday, Emmanuel stood before his entire congregation. The church was packed. Word had spread. These things always spread. People were waiting to see what the pastor would do, waiting to see if Ruth would be exposed and disgraced. Emmanuel stood at the pulpit, and he said he had a confession to make. He said that while he had been busy building a church, he had been destroying a home. He said his wife had been lonely for years, and he had chosen his ministry over her so many times that she had stopped counting. He said he was not standing there to excuse what happened, but to take responsibility for his part in it. There was not a dry eye in the room. Ruth sat in the front row, not smiling the painted smile, but crying real tears. It wasn't the end of the pain. There was still a lot to face: the gossip, the shame, the broken trust, the hard conversations. But it was the beginning of something honest, something real. They started counselling the following week. They sat across from a therapist and said the things they had never said to each other. It was uncomfortable. It was difficult. Some days Ruth drove home from those sessions and just sat in the car outside the house for 20 minutes. But they kept going. Because sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is not walk away. Sometimes it's choosing to stay and do the hard work of becoming whole. Not for the church, not for the congregation, not for appearances, but for yourself. And for each other. Thank you for watching. Ruth chose honesty over a perfect image, and Emmanuel chose humility over pride. But here is the question. If you were in Ruth's shoes, would you have stayed or walked away? Drop your answer in the comments below and subscribe. More powerful stories are coming.